Hey guys, welcome to another episode of El Jefe's Shop Shop. This is episode 3 of the Seal build, so let's get stuck into it. So I'm going to start off with the subframe today. I need to lop off the 3 holes up the top for the bumper clearance and give it a coat of black paint. So I've just done the first coat of paint on the subframe. As you can see, I cut off the 3 lumps and gave this a quick paint. So I cleaned this with degreaser and brake cleaner last week and then just quickly went over it before I painted it. So this is the first coat and it looks pretty good, but it just started to rain, so I had to push the engine crane in because I was painting over there. So I had to push the engine crane in here, so hopefully there's not too much water on it, but I'm going to do another coat anyway, so it shouldn't matter too much. So next up I want to paint and reseal this engine. So I'm going to start with the rocker cover. I'll pull that off, pull all the coils off, take the rocker cover off, clean that and paint it. So when I'm pulling things apart that I'm not too familiar with, I always have these cheap Ziploc bags and a texter and just write what I'm taking off. So the rocker cover, the coil packs and the fuel rail is what I'm going to be tackling up here on the engine. So then as I take the bolts out, I chuck them into these plastic bags, zip them up, and then when I go to put it back together, I don't get confused with all the bolts. So I've taken off all the fasteners, the 2 breathers, coil packs, and every single earth. So now this is ready to go. So I've taken the dipstick out, which is in the rocker cover, and also the oil cap off because we don't need that to paint. So we'll pop this off and have a look. But when you're popping these off, make sure you get something in here and lever it slightly. Go somewhere else, do it again, somewhere else, do it again. Don't just lean on in one spot because you'll probably snap the casing and then you'll have to get a new rocker cover, which is not ideal. So if you ease your way around, it'll eventually just pop off and then it'll be all free. So this rocker cover came off really easily and it looks nice and golden in there. There's no build up of sludge or anything like that. There's a little bit just here, a little bit on the top of the caps, but that's nothing to worry about. So this looks reasonably clean and it's probably been well looked after, so we're good to continue. So while I'm in here, just see how much plays on the chain. There's only a couple of mil, which is about right. So it's looking pretty good. Coming over to the rocker cover, this is the inside obviously. Also looks quite golden and there's not a lot of build up. So this is a pretty healthy looking engine. So now we'll just clean this up, replace the gaskets and put it back on. So the rocker cover's all stripped down, ready to get cleaned up. So these are the gaskets I took out of the rocker cover, I took off. So you got the PCV valve, and then the PCV valve rubber was actually very brittle, so it's good to replace that, which we're going to be anyway. And this rocker cover gasket, the spark plug tubes are quite hard. They're not brittle yet, and they kind of bounce back to shape, so it's not too bad, but we'll replace it anyway. And then this is just the nut that goes on the top. So we've got some new gaskets for those as well. So it's really important to buy a VRS kit when you're doing this sort of thing, because you'd forget about those two and the PCV valve, and then eventually you'll have a leak and it'll be all over your brand new painted rocker cover. So the rocker cover's all cleaned. I used a toothbrush, a green scouring pad, brake cleaner and degreaser, and then once I was finished gave it a pressure wash. So it came up reasonably well. You can see there's a little bit of corrosion and pitting that's a bit dirtier than the other side, but that's good enough for what we want, so we're just going to paint this. So then moving back to the engine, I've cleaned off this surface where the rocker cover gasket seals, put some masking tape on it, and then trimmed around the edges. So then I've put some alfoil over the top of the engine so that none of the crud gets in it. And then I've started pulling apart the front of the engine. So I've taken the power steering pump off, the air conditioning pump off, the front engine mount, and the wiring that went over the engine. Then traced the engine back to the fuel rail and to the 2 sensors on the throttle body. Pulled all that off. Then these 2 sensors down here, that's the cam timing, and I think that must be the coolant temp. So I've undone all those and folded all that back out the way. So now I'm just cleaning off the engine and pulling everything apart so that I can paint it. Continuing with disassembly, I'm taking the water pump off, the alternator off, and the belt off. So I've just taken the intake plenum off and the throttle body off. So you can start to see the engine coming apart quite nicely. So to undo this VVTi solenoid, or whatever Daihatsu calls it, then there's a pressure sensor there, or a knock sensor. Take that off. Undo this wire here, and undo the starter motor, and then take the starter motor out, and then the engine will be pretty much bare. So I'm still pulling apart the engine. I've taken the gearbox off, and the starter motor. Everything on the back side of the engine is off. So then coming around the front, I've left the oil filter and the housing on for now. I'm going to take the clutch and flywheel off at some point, so I can do the rear main seal. And then on the front, I've only got the harmonic balancer left. So So we're getting there, and then I need to clean it up and paint it. So I've just taken the clutch and pressure plate off, and now I'm trying to undo the harmonic balancer. So I've thrown a bell housing bolt back in, got a big pry bar and jammed it between the flywheel teeth and the engine with the bolt holding it in place. And if I spin the engine around, I've got the spanner on the front, and then I jumped on that, and now it's all loose. So now I can get the harmonic balancer bolt off. So same story for the flywheel bolts. Put a bell housing bolt back in, jam the pry bar between the engine, the flywheel and the bolt, put the ratchet or the breaker bar on there and jump on it. So in that last clip you could hear the rain was getting pretty heavy. So all of yesterday and the day after that clip I didn't film anything because the rain was too bad. I couldn't even hear myself think. So since then we have painted the engine, the rocker cover, put the coil packs back on, done the rear and front main seals, done the rocker cover gasket, and all of the timing cases come off, resealed all that, cleaned it all, painted it, fitted the new water pump, put the new harmonic balancer pulley back on, and refitted the VVTI solenoid and the intake plenum. So we're getting there, just trying to smash it out as quickly as I can. So today I'm going to start off by cleaning up because there's crap everywhere. So that's a bit better. These are the parts that I need to clean and reinstall. So it's mostly just accessories for the engine. And we've got the other accessories for when I start putting the engine back into the engine bay. We've got the throttle body, the engine itself, all the nuts and bolts are on the seat, all the rattle cans and colours and oil, and the wiring loom and the power steering setup. So here are the engine mounts that I reinforced the other day. As you can see, when the silicon's dried, it shrunk a little bit, so these aren't as smooth as they were when I was applying it, but they are a lot more rigid, so can't even move them really. That one moves a tiny bit, but that's all. This one doesn't move at all. So much better than they were, and we just need to paint them and clean up the excess silicon, and they'll be good to go back in the car. So I got stuck into cleaning. I've cleaned the throttle body, the sump, the alternator, all the engine mounts, the rack bracket, the sway bar brackets, the starter motor, the other engine mount, the rear mount for the engine mount, the oil pickup, the aircon bracket, the idler, the front engine mount, the throttle body support, the oil filter extension, the aircon, the power steering, the thermostat housing, and the idler bearing pulley. So I got carried away, but it's all clean now. So I need to take this to Tim and get him to weld a bung on for the oil return for the turbo. And some of this stuff needs to get painted, so I'll start doing all that now, then we start fitting it to the engine. So it's been a few days since I filmed anything from the Daihatsu. I haven't really had a whole lot of time on it, but I've been resealing and adding things to the engine as I go. A couple minutes every day, just to try and keep the thing moving along. So we've got the throttle body back on with the bracket, got the sump and the lower sump section sealed back together, and Tim has welded a bung on for the oil drain. So thank you, Tim, for that. So there, he's drilled it out, welded that on, so we can seal the sump back on. And then I've put the oil extension housing back on and the oil filter. So it's all coming together pretty well. Slowly been painting things, and they're ready to go back on today. So I'll put on what I can, and then we'll work out where we're at. So I've been working on this for about 2 hours now. We've got the sump and oil pickup back on, the front engine mount and the block mount, the aircon pump and the power steering pump. So with the oil filter extension, that actually gets in the way of the sump. So I had to back that off, put the sump on and then do it up again. So if I would give any advice, it would be to leave that off until the sump's on. Then I've also started making the oil feed line for the turbo. So we've got the 90-degree brass fitting, which is very slim because the speedflow stuff doesn't fit in here. Then we've got an adapter from 1/8 NPT to the -6, the -6 T-piece with the oil sensor on it. So that's obviously a 1/8 NPT as well. Then we've got a hose end fitting off of the T-piece into what will be the feed line. So I've just left it long, obviously. Don't know where the turbo is going yet. I'll probably take this off, but that's just planning ahead for later. So it's all coming together. Haven't done anything on the back yet, other than the sump bolts, which are down the bottom. And then on this side, I've chucked the alternator back on. And on the front, I've got the idler pulley bracket back on and all of the bolts for the timing case down here and down the side here. So I'm going to chuck the subframe back onto the engine crane and give it another coat of paint. So I've just painted the rear engine mount so that can go on this afternoon. And then this can sit on the subframe again. So I haven't paid any attention to the gearbox yet. We're still not sure what we're going to do about the clutch. So I'm going to leave that for now, but I'll just get this engine all wrapped up, do everything I can. So I'm getting a exhaust flange cut by a laser cutting company locally called Sonex. So they're going to cut that for me, and I've got a few bits for a log manifold. So I'll make that up for the turbo, and then I'll have to plumb in the feed and the drain and the two coolant lines. So we're getting there. So I want to try and get it back in the car before that gets here so that I can mock everything up. So I might chuck the gearbox back on with just 2 bolts or something and mount it all on the subframe, put it in the car, run what I can or what I have to, and then make the turbo manifold up. And then once I'm done with that, take it all out again, put a clutch in, clean the gearbox up, reseal everything, and put it all back together. Just going out for lunch, so we went to jump in my Lexus, and we can't move. I'm bogged in about 1.5 inches of mud on both sides. That is very entertaining. Can't move it forwards or backwards. It's absolutely just spinning. It's just stuck. What a goose. Here's the marks from yesterday when I got bogged. So there's the rear wheels and the front wheels are up here. Rear wheels. And all the mud drag out. So we had to put it in gear and then both push the car and then quickly jump in it before it rolled away and then drive it out. It was pretty hilarious, but we couldn't do it before we were going to lunch.